On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we have Mr. Curtis Franklin, Mr. Brian Chee here today. Now, the NSA has always been that unspoken agency that protects a nation's security. Well, the agency has definitely evolved over the years. We'll get into what that means. Plus, we have a great guest this week, Neil Cresswell. He's CEO and co-founder of Portainer, and he's going to show us just how you can simplify the deployment and management of container-based environments. You shouldn't miss it. TWiT on the set.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 453, recorded July 23rd, 2021, containing security. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Eset. Eset boasts ransomware protection. That means business with internet security products and services backed by world-class research and tech support. Learn how to protect your business from ransomware at business.eset.com/twit. And by Endava. Subscribe and listen to Tech Reimagine, the podcast from Endava, from wherever you get your podcasts. And by Thinks Canary. Detect attackers on your network while avoiding irritating false alarms. Get the alerts that matter. For 10% off and a 60-day money-back guarantee, go to canary.tools/twit. Enter the code TWIT in the How Do You Hear About Us box. Welcome to TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm your host, Louis Maresca, your guide through this big world of the enterprise, but I definitely can't guide you by myself. I need to bring in the professionals, the experts in their field, starting with our enterprise and security expert, and he's a senior analyst at Omdia. He's Mr. Curtis Franklin. Great, Curtis, it's great to see you as always. How is the week treating you?
So far, so good, Lou. We're trotting along, coming back from vacation and getting ready to head out to Las Vegas for Black Hat and DEF CON. Before then, though, I've got another event I'm going to be telling everyone else about at the end of the show. Lots of interesting stuff going on. And now that we're traveling again, I'm going to be out and amongst them more and more through the fall.
Fantastic. Love the teaser. Looking forward to that. Well, speaking of busy, we also have our amazing network and security expert, and also he's an all-around tech geek as well, Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, how are you, my friend? What's keeping you busy this week?
I'm doing great. Tinkering with IoT devices. I finally got my lithium-ion battery packs in, so I can go and have my IoT devices ride out short outages. And starting to design the package for a Amazon Echo-enabled pool temperature monitoring system that I'm going to open source once it's got the bugs worked out. Ought to be fun.
As you know, Cheebert's giving me the IoT itch. Sounds like a disease, but it's definitely going to be fun going forward. So thank you, Cheebert, for introducing me to that. Well, speaking of an itch, I have an enterprise itch, and there's quite a bit going on this week. Now, I always thought of the NSA being an organization that comes from the movies. You know, the one that does black security ops to protect the nation's security. Well, people couldn't even tell that they worked there at the time. Well, speaking of the new norm, the NSA is now front and center. We'll talk about just what that means. Plus, we have a great guest. Containers and orchestration management is sometimes challenging. Well, today we have a great guest, Neil Cresswell, CEO, co-founder of Portainer. He's going to just show us how simplifying deployment and management of container-based environments is easy as pie. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and jump into this week's Blips. Well, it's a weekly thing to talk about new ransomware and spyware. Now, you may have heard about the NSO spyware, Pegasus. It's being used to mount zero-click attacks against human rights activists, lawyers, and journalists. Well, some operating systems and device companies are attempting to prevent such attacks onto their devices by patching holes. Well, some researchers think that some device companies are just not doing enough. Now, according to iOS security researcher Will Strafak, he thinks that Apple can do more when it comes to combating NSO and others who exploit combat zero-day vulnerabilities in iOS. Now, NSO Group makes spyware called Pegasus, which is sold to government and law enforcement agencies. And the company purchases so-called zero-day vulnerabilities from hackers and its software said to be capable of mounting zero-click exploits where no user interaction is required by the target. Now, in particular, it's reported that simply receiving a particular iMessage without opening or interacting with it in any way can allow an iPhone to actually be compromised with personal data exposed. Now, NSO sells Pegasus only to governments, but its customers include countries with extremely poor human rights records with political opponents and others targeted. Now, according to the researcher, there is a lot that Apple could do in a very safe way to allow observation and imaging of iOS devices in order to catch this type of bad behavior, yet that does not seem to be treated as a priority over there at Apple. What does this mean for the organizations? Well, it means that they need to do more for themselves here to protect themselves from such attacks. The question is, at what's the cost?
Intel says that the chip shortage could stretch for 2 more years. Intel Corp Chief Executive Pat Gelsinger sees the global semiconductor shortage potentially stretching into 2023. This is bad news for many industries, especially the automotive industry, which has seen production delays due to a lack of key electronic components. German car maker Volkswagen AG this month warned the global shortage could worsen over the next 6 months, and it could take 1 to 2 years to get back to a reasonable supply and demand balance in the semiconductor industry, Gelsinger said in an interview after the company posted second quarter earnings on Thursday. We have a long way to go yet, he told the Wall Street Journal. It just takes a long time to build manufacturing capacity. Supply shortages could start showing signs of easing later this year, Gelsinger said, echoing comments from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the world's largest contract chip maker. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company and Intel are adding new chip production plants, though some of that capacity won't be ready for 2 more years. The PC market has been booming and is poised to continue to do so, Gelsinger told the Wall Street Journal, as people and companies replace old hardware amid the post-pandemic return to work and the release of Microsoft Corp's Windows 11 later this year. Put them together, and it means more demand for fewer chips and more shortages in the future.
Well, Kaseya, the remote management software seller at the center of a ransomware operation that struck as many as 1,500 downstream networks, said it has obtained a decryptor that should successfully restore data encrypted during the 4th of July weekend attack. Affiliates of REvil, one of the internet's most cutthroat ransomware groups, exploited a critical zero-day vulnerability in Miami, Florida-based Kaseya's VSA remote management product. The vulnerability, which Kaseya was days away from patching anyway, allowed the ransomware operators to compromise the networks of about 60 customers. From there, the extortionists infected as many as 1,500 networks that relied on the 60 customers for services. Finally, a universal decryptor. Quote, "We obtained the decryptor yesterday from a trusted third party and have been using it successfully on affected customers," according to Dana Lindholm, Senior VP of Corporate Marketing, in an email written to Ars Technica Thursday morning. Quote, "We are providing tech support to use the decryptor. We have a team reaching out to our customers and don't have any more detail at the moment." In a private message, threat analyst Brett Callow of security firm Emsisoft said, "We are working with Kaseya to support their customer engagement efforts. We have confirmed the key is effective at unlocking victims and will continue to provide support to Kaseya and customers. My comment is bravo to my buddy Brett Callow."
Now, I think operating systems are a pretty interesting thing, but whether they feel more secure or not, they're still built by humans, right? Humans make mistakes. Well, Chrome OS is no exception to this rule. Its open source, impactful code can sometimes flow through the supply chain in the system. Well, just this past week, Google says it has fixed a major Chrome OS bug that locked users out of their devices. That's right. Google's bulletin says that Chrome OS version 991.4472.165, which was briefly available this week, renders users unable to log into their devices, essentially bricking them. Now, the go-to advice while this broken update is out there is to not reboot your device. That means turning off your device or auto rebooting right now could actually be a bad thing. Now, the bulletin says that the new build, the 167 build, is rolling out now to fix the issue, but it could take a, quote, few days to hit everyone. Now, users affected by the bad update can either wait for the device to update again or power wash the device, meaning wipe all the local data to get logged in. And the problem apparently boils down to a single character typo in the C++ code. Now, Google made a mistake in a conditional statement in the Chrome's OS's crypto home vault key set, the part of the OS that holds user encryption keys. Now, the line missed a second ampersand in a C++ if statement, conditional statement there. It happens sometimes. Now, it sounds like because of this error, Chrome OS never properly checked user passwords against the stored keys. So even correct passwords come back with a message saying, sorry, your password couldn't be verified. Now, Chrome OS has 3 testing channels that changes are supposed to go through, the Canary, Dev, and Beta channels, with weeks of testing between releases. So somehow this bug escaped that entire process. Now, this process problem also seems like something like semantic code scanners usually could catch, or maybe unit testing or automated testing in some of those environments. Now, with every failure comes a lesson. And I'm guessing Google is definitely going to teach one. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, we have a really great set of bites. But before we get to the bites, we do have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Eset. Now, for over 30 years, Eset has been a global leader in cybersecurity, and it's the provider we actually rely on here at TWiT. Now, successful ransomware attacks are in the news every day, and as a small business, we need to be protected from these attacks with a solution we can trust. With nearly 2,400 U.S. companies, healthcare facilities, and more falling victim to ransomware in 2020 alone, we trust Eset to keep us from becoming just a statistic. Their solutions block advanced threats with multiple layers of protection built right in, and a light system footprint, so you don't even know it's there. Now, we're excited to talk to you about Eset Protect Advanced. It has a ton of great things you can take advantage of right away. Let's talk about the security management console and what it gives you. Now, it gives you a real-time visibility of all your endpoints and plays a vital role in preventing and detecting ransomware. Plus, you can even use it for on-premise or in the cloud. And with its advanced features like server security, mail security, and more, they help you sleep a little bit more sound at night, knowing that you're protected. Now, not only does Eset care about protecting your business with solutions like Eset Secure Authentication, they offer resources specifically designed for your employees to protect themselves and your company against things like ransomware and phishing attempts. Now, one of those resources is multi-factor authentication. Now, if MFA is not already in place at your company, you'll want to seriously consider Eset Secure Authentication, as it's essential to preventing ransomware and other invasive attacks. Now, MFA is user-friendly for employees and it's easy to deploy for you, and you can be used with Office 365, Google Apps, and Dropbox. And once your employees log in and endpoints are secure with MFA, it's time to train them for battle against online scams. Now, you've heard this stat before, that 95% of all breaches are caused by human error. And so the first line of defense to make things better is always going to be your employees. Well, Eset has made learning fun with their cybersecurity awareness training and interactive gamified training that teaches employees how to recognize phishing, create strong passwords, and follow those best practices on the internet. And it's only under 90 minutes. Now, we've been using Eset for years, and as you can see, they continue to innovate not only through their products, but educational tools that can add a vital layer of protection to your business. You are definitely going to want to check them out. Successful ransomware attacks are in the news every day. Trust Eset to keep you from becoming a statistic. Try an interactive demo of Eset Protect Advanced at business.eset.com/twit. Ransomware protection that means business. Get protected today. Learn more at business.eset.com/twit. And we thank Eset for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's time for the bites. Now, back in the day, NSA was that unspoken security organization. Well, today's NSA is evolving to the new norm. Chee, how is the government organizations and organizations like NSA evolving over time?
Well, let's go do a quick history lesson. The article that I grabbed from newsopener.com talks about how the NSA, National Security Agency's gradually emergence from the shadows was inevitable. And their example, it's being interviewed with Vinnie Liu. Now, Vinnie was hired is what a lot of stories are based on, when things like hackers and things like that, where a brilliant young person In this case, Vinny was hired out of high school at age 17. And he met and befriended a couple of the NSA analysts and technicians on an IRC channel. And the year was 1999. Well, 22 years later, Vinny is now the CEO and co-founder of an offensive security firm called Bishop Fox. Now, he is basically saying the emergence of the NSA from the shadows was inevitable. Especially, I start interjecting because I did spend a bunch of time before Vinny arrived at Fort Meade, Maryland. And in those days, we were not allowed to say where we were working. Even though I was a government employee contractor working with them, I wasn't even able to tell my boss where I was. Well, the world is changing to the point of I'm going to ask Curt in just a second what booth he has some swag from. But that's the interesting thing. NSA is now reaching out to the general public, mostly to smaller organizations because of things like ransomware. We've got malware and ransomware hitting smaller and smaller organizations because the big boys are actually making progress and so forth. But the idea is NSA wants to start, one, changing its impression with the general public, and two, trying to provide better practices, better information, and in some cases, some help with getting software cleaned up so that the world in general can be more secure, which in their mind is good for the NSA and good for the federal government. Well, Curt, could you tell us a little about the swag you managed to grab from the NSA booth?
Oh, absolutely. This was one of the great moments in my history of grabbing stuff from booths because, a good dozen years ago, I was at one of the security trade shows and was surprised to see a booth by the NSA. Now, like Brian, I had grown up in an era when NSA informally stood for no such agency. There were years and years where the mere mention that it existed was a violation of national security. But here they were with an exhibit. So I grabbed some NSA notepads, an NSA notebook, NSA coasters, basic stuff. Took them back home with me. And when I went to dinner with a good friend who back years ago had been a photo analyst with the NSA, he nearly fell out of his chair that I was able to get these things that couldn't have existed when he was working for the agency. But, one of the interesting things is that for many years, going back at least a dozen and more than that, NSA has had two parallel missions. The super secret, creepy spy stuff is the signals intelligence, SIGINT, where the NSA is the agency that basically is charged with capturing communications globally, and especially between and among our enemies, figuring out what's being said so that they can, in theory, feed intelligence to agencies who can then go out and do something about threats. The other part of their mission is cybersecurity, protecting the nation's cybersecurity practices and infrastructure. Some of that is aimed at government agencies where they sort of work alongside the NIST to help do things like come up with best practices, find what the threats are, figure out how to respond to them. And part of that is to the private sector. So what we have seen over the last dozen years or so is that private sector piece of the NSA growing and being much, much more forward in reaching out. I think it's fascinating that there are these two pieces, each of which will claim really not to know anything about the other. But the fact is, there are some really very good researchers and technologists working for the NSA, and I tend to be very happy that they're sharing some of their expertise with all of us out in the business world.
Well, speaking about sharing their expertise, the NSA kind of had this migration starting even when I was still serving. And the idea is, in the past, we had what we call stovepipe applications, custom built things like bulk encryptors, secure telephones, and things like that, because at that point in time, computers didn't have enough horsepower to be able to handle the bulk encryption. Well, things have changed. And now, instead of stovepipe applications, there is a government-wide mandate to instead use what's called COTS and GOTS. COTS is commercial off the shelf. GOTS is government off the shelf. So as time has gone on, the capabilities of, say, things like bulk encryptors, securing servers, PKI facilities for dual key encryption and so forth, it's no longer quite as necessary for specialized versions just for the government. The systems are secure enough and well engineered enough that commercial stuff can be used for government purposes. Just look at JEDI. We're using commercial off-the-shelf cloud applications bidding for secure government contracts. Now, how far has this gone? Well, NSA expertise is been slowly being interjected into a lot of commercial facilities. Now, I'm not sure if Lou has ever seen any on the Redmond campus, but they were there. I actually ran across one of them when I was visiting Oliver when he was still at Microsoft, and I go, oh, okay, I'm not supposed to know he's here. But these types of people are emerging all over the place, and I know Lou can't talk about it, but I will say Microsoft is very involved with the government world. And I don't know, Lou, how much can you say?
Actually, it's how much do I know is the better question.
Okay.
I think in this case, working for the Office team, obviously government agencies and services alike, they use Office. And so what those agencies that do use it, we don't talk about, but in the same sense, from that's my extent to my knowledge around the security side of things. But in the same sense, you're right. I think that companies like, Microsoft, other companies especially, are actually pairing with these government agencies, especially to help determine, whether their software is secure or who, are attackers or specific attackers are from specific governments or, are adversaries from other countries and stuff like that. So I think they're definitely working to reduce a lot of that noise. So they work with these agencies to help that along. So I do know that a lot of companies are actually starting to do this, and I think it's going to be very helpful as they work together.
Well, here's one more thing that's interesting. The FBI has been running a program called InfraGard, spelled INFRAGARD, I believe. It's set up so that the FBI technology and advice and also bulletins can be shared with trusted individuals in the private sector. I happen to be a member, and it allows me to get advanced warnings on suspicious things that they've, trends that they're looking at and so forth. I have a feeling because InfraGard has been wildly successful on helping small to medium-sized businesses or large businesses prepare for cyber attacks, that I got a sneaky hunch our friends at No Such Agency are taking a page from the FBI playbook and saying, well, we probably need to do the same thing, but let's keep things on the QT and start doing technology transfers. I see this as being really interesting. We've had it in the Department of Defense. We've had it with the FBI, now the NSA. NIST has been very much private sector oriented. So this handshake between government and private sector had to happen. It's basically the United States learning how to play the same game our enemies are playing, because our enemies' governments are working directly with their organizations, that produce things. Why shouldn't the United States? Anyway, lots of fun. But you know what? I think we're getting close to the time we need to go and talk to our guest. What do you think, Lou?
Absolutely. Coming up is my favorite part of the show. We get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on us. But, before we get to that, we do have to thank another sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. And that's, of course, Endava. Season 2 of Endava's podcast, Tech Reimagine, is out right now. Now, Tech Reimagine brings together leading tech personalities and industry experts such as Guy Kawasaki, Mary Williams, Alex Hunter, Brian McBride, Tom Gruber, Dave Copeland, Inma Martinez, Viola Llewellyn, and many more. Now, the podcast discusses the big questions around technology and its industries. Guests and hosts will be talking about how these trends impact our everyday lives and how our relationship with technology is constantly reimagined. Now, check out the episode Insurance Reimagined, Parts 1 and Parts 2, where guests Ann Norclett and Kevin Crawford discuss the role IT plays in the insurance industry. Or 2 episodes about the role of AI reimagined. Boris Sergal and Radu Orgadon talk about the regulations, accountability, and expectations that arise when using AI to solve complex problems. Now, they discuss what the future holds for this technology and for the individuals who are using it on a daily basis. Interested in shopping? Well, catch parts 1 and 2 of our shopping experience reimagined with guests Thomas Beechin and Jeremy Mays, where they dive into some of the most significant shifts they've seen in consumer behavior over the last 12 months, including the increasing popularity of direct-to-consumer and buy online, pick up in store, and how the shift to digital is pushing people and companies to reimagine the way we shop. Now, Endava has been reimagining the relationship between technology and people. Tech Reimagine explores this relationship on a deeper level with a look at the most recent experiences with technology and its experts. Learn more about how tech is becoming so much more in this world that's constantly growing and changing. It's a podcast you definitely don't want to miss. Subscribe and listen to Tech Reimagine, the podcast from Endava, from wherever you get your podcasts. And we thank Endava for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's my favorite part of the show. We actually get to bring in a guest who drops knowledge on the TWiT riot. And today we have Neil Cresswell. He's CEO and co-founder of Portainer. Welcome to the show, Neil.
It's awesome to be here. Can't wait.
Now, you're across the world, right? Where are you located?
Right now in Auckland, New Zealand. And thanks to COVID, I've been here trapped here for 2 years, basically, but and I can't wait to get out and travel again soon. But currently, Auckland, New Zealand, in the middle of winter.
It's a beautiful place. They're a beautiful place. Now, our audience loves to hear people's origin stories. Can you maybe take us through a short journey through tech and where it brought you to Portainer?
Sure. So my background is a consultant. I've always been a consultant, will always be a consultant. And through that journey, that experience, I saw a lot of organizations really struggling to adopt new technologies. There's almost always someone in an organization who wants to try out some new tech. They can think of a really cool business reason or tech reason why they want to do it. They deploy the technology and say, right, here's this tech now. Now we want to roll it out across the business. And the business has always really struggled to embrace this tech. They've got to retrain their people. They've got to retool all of their infrastructure management and monitoring tools. And through my experiences, I thought, this whole Docker technology, Kubernetes technology, it's really amazing, game-changing tech. but how are people really going to bring this into their organization and upskill their staff, or use the technology whilst they upskill their staff? And there really wasn't anything out there to help bridge the gap between current state and desired future state, being virtual machines, infrastructure, Windows-based administrators, and the future state being containers, microservices, full GitHub and GitOps automation. And that was really why Portainer came about, is how can we help people bridge this gap?
Right. Yeah, I think that, with the movement towards containers and obviously microservices, we find that a lot of organizations are actually struggling here to figure out the best way to manage lots of those things. Like, for instance, how do I deploy my app? How do I make sure that I'm constantly tracking how its deployment is going, how it's working, and ensuring it's secure and all that stuff? What is Portainer doing to help organizations in these areas?
The whole thing is, if you are just deploying a Kubernetes or Docker environment just for a sandpit, for playing around, it's actually relatively straightforward. There's a bunch of tools out there that will help you get something running. In my view, those tools just get you into trouble quicker. So if you're going to use this tech in prod, mission critical production environments, you really need to know what you're doing. You really need to make sure that the systems are safe and secure, and that you've got all the right policies, controls in place. And the problem about this technology is that it actually by default wants to be open and friendly and inclusive, and it wants to let you do anything with it. The problem is, if you don't know what you don't know, you can end up deploying an environment that's actually really open and is just really waiting to be attacked. There was actually a survey that said there were 50,000 Kubernetes endpoints open and exposed to the internet in a 2-month survey that was done by Trend Micro. And it was insane just how many are out there. Portainer's job is to sit in between person and machine, to simply say, let's basically create a safe pair of hands, some guardrails or controls and policies for the system that people can actually consume the system within. So rather than a DevOps engineer or an SRE or a IT administrator or a sysop, call them what you like, having to worry about giving everyone uncontrolled access to their environment, or having to worry about tightening it down tight, and then saying, well, now the user can't do anything. You put Portainer in the middle, and then Portainer will actually control what the user can do and see through quotas and policies.
Now, a lot of applications, they have a lot of different dependencies. They have a lot of, they potentially, of course, they're probably part of the container, but in the same sense, a lot of these dependencies might require specific security permissions or policies within the environment. Now, like you said, that's obviously pretty difficult to configure these, the containers to meet those requirements sometimes. And sometimes you open things up too much. Does Portainer deal with specific types of applications, or can it deal with the different dependencies and understand those policies and security that it's required for them in order to make sure they're configured correctly?
So we've actually built the application to be able to cover 30% of use cases, 60% of use cases, 100% of use cases. And the way we do that is by using various different features in the application. If you just have a really common deployment mode, you can use our form-based wizard, and it'll just guide you through installing an application. But there are constraints around that form-based wizard. Obviously, you can't predict every single possible configuration in a form-based wizard. So if that is not good enough for you, we go up a level, and you can actually connect your source code repos and basically ingest manifest files, config files, and from that we will let you deploy pretty much anything. Or worst case scenario, if you need complete control, then you can get a command prompt and actually run any single command, and we simply proxy it through to the back end safely.
It's very cool. It's very cool. I do like the ability to kind of customize that in a way, because in the same sense, like I said, a lot of applications have a lot of different dependencies when it goes to those worlds. Now, are you seeing as organizations, a lot of organizations are trying to digitally transform. They're trying to move to the container technology. It's a way to reduce costs. It's a way to secure things more. What are some of the challenges there, and how is Portainer helping with that?
So if you choose to deploy a Kubernetes type environment on premises, you're in for a world of challenges. It's far easier to go to a cloud provider, swipe your credit card, and get yourself a fully managed Kubernetes offering. But some people are still not that comfortable 100% in the cloud, so they want on-prem solutions. That's quite challenging.
Right.
But more challenging than actually building the cluster is actually maintaining the cluster, troubleshooting the cluster, deploying your applications, and everything else. And so traditionally, organizations, to get started with this tech, would have to go and hire a bunch of really expensive people. And those people are actually in scarce demand at the moment. Everybody wants to do Kubernetes. There are only so many Kubernetes certified people out there, or trained people out there. So there's basically a bidding war to get hold of these staff, and our whole journey is basically saying you can put Portainer in there. Your existing IT trained staff, not Kubernetes trained staff, can use Portainer, engage with Portainer, deploy and manage applications using Kubernetes, whilst in the background you're actually upskilling them in this tech. You don't necessarily need to wait to get started. Now, obviously, you still need someone on your staff who knows this technology to actually build the thing to start off with. But what we're saying is the vast majority of your staff can just use the tech. They don't need to necessarily know how to engineer the tech.
Right. Now, when you talk a little bit about security, a lot of times that obviously doesn't necessarily consider the compliance side of things too. Do you guys handle compliance? Like, for instance, if my software that's running in these containers, they have to be running in a particular compliant way. They have to be put in an environment or a cloud in a compliant way. Is there ways to manage that as well through Portainer?
So what we do inside the application is set governance and security policies. So we say for users that are deploying applications, they can only deploy applications in these particular namespaces. Within these namespaces, we can enforce things like quota. So an application must have a quota assigned to it. You can't just say unlimited. One of the quickest ways to actually self-DDoS is to deploy an application without any kind of quoting. So we basically make it mandatory for users to set limits, CPU and memory limits on their environments. We basically disable the use of things like default namespaces in Kubernetes because that's really dangerous to use that. We allow the administrators to say we want users to have access to load balancers or ingress controllers or persistent storage, but only this much, or only on this cluster and not this cluster. So we define all of these governance rules around how users engage with the system. Can they do things like privileged access? Can they bind mount file systems? We set all these rules and restrictions for the user, and then by default, the application simply cannot deploy unless it complies with those policies. So we don't have to worry about, is an application in compliance? The user cannot deploy an application unless it is in compliance with the policies.
Fantastic. So I did notice there's a lot of open source here. What is, obviously when it comes to open source, a lot of people have questions. Okay, well, if this company is supporting open source, they're putting their software out there. What's the revenue model? What is the way that the company is making money and bringing in that money?
Yeah, the market automatically associates open source to be free. So if it's open source, therefore it must be free, and that's generally now the case, which is at times frustrating. We have an open source product. It does 99% of every feature and function you can possibly imagine. If, however, there is a specific use case, and we have said in the enterprise or commercial use case space, there are things like additional levels of compliance that you might need, additional levels of security you might need over and above normal. Then we have a commercial version of that Portainer business that you pay for. That's not open source. It's derived from our open source version, but it is enhanced. So we've added additional things like audit logs, activity logs, and stricter policy controls, and also made it far easier to connect Portainer to external authentication systems. So when users log into Portainer, they're logging in with corporate directory systems rather than their own custom directories. So it's basically just a focus on business use case instead. For that particular business use case, there is a commercial version. For everybody else, there's the open source version.
Fantastic. Now, one interesting thing is obviously there's a couple orchestrators out there in the wild. What do you support? All of them? Do you support a specific type of them? Where does Portainer? What's the kind of reach of its support?
So our focus is on helping people deploy and manage applications that run on containerized platforms, we don't actually care what it is. At the moment, we support Docker, Docker Swarm, and Kubernetes. Docker and Docker Swarm because that's where we came from. We started out 4 years ago doing Docker and Docker Swarm management, and then we added Kubernetes middle of last year. But basically, in the future, we want to extend that. We already have support for Azure ACI. So if you have ACI-based environments, you can deploy applications through Portainer on ACI, and we want to extend that even further, so into Google Cloud Run and all of the other cloud provider container service offerings. We are also having interest in Nomad as well, so being able to deploy against Nomad. But from our perspective, as long as your application runs in a container, we want to be able to help you deploy and manage it.
Fantastic. Well, when we come back, I do want to bring my co-host back in because they are chomping at the bit here. There's some questions to ask. But before we get to that, we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Things Canary. The last thing anyone wants or needs right now is a data breach. Rather than the villain lying in wait, you have a hero. That's Things Canary waiting for them. Now, companies usually find out too late that they've been compromised. And even after they've already spent millions of dollars on IT security, they find out it wasn't enough. Well, Canary has completely changed the game. It's designed to be installed and configured in minutes and, pardon the pun, left to its own devices. You don't even have to think about it. Now, attackers prowling a target network look for juicy content. They'll browse Active Directory for file servers and explore file shares looking for documents. They'll try default passwords against network devices and web services, and they'll scan for open services across the network. Now, canaries can be deployed throughout your entire network, and you can make them look identical to a router, a switch, a NAS server, a Linux box, or a Windows server, so attackers won't know they've been caught. The Things Canaries are designed to look like the things that hackers want to get to. You can put fake files on them or enroll them in Active Directory, and when attackers investigate further, they give themselves away and you're instantly notified. You can also use Canary tokens. Now, these are tiny tripwires that can drop into hundreds of places. They follow the Things Canary philosophy of trivial to deploy with a ridiculously high quality of signal. Now, if an alert happens, Canary will notify you the way you want. Plus, you won't be inundated with false alarms. You can get alerts by email or text message on your console, Slack, webhook, syslog, or even their API. Choose the option that works best for your business. Now, it's important that companies know two things when it comes to data breaches. Now, one, hackers will usually take the path of least resistance, and that's typically your staff. And two, it takes on an average of 191 days for a company to realize there's been a data breach. Now, that's too long, and Things Canary solves that problem for you. People behind Canary have been in the security game for almost 2 decades and have trained companies, militaries, and governments on how to break into networks. That's the knowledge they've used to build Canary. Now, Things Canaries are deployed all over the world on all 7 continents and are one of the best tools against data breaches. Visit canary.tools/twit, and for just $7,500 per year, you'll get 5 canaries, your own hosted console upgrades, support, and maintenance. And if you use code TWIT in the How to Hear About Us box, you'll get 10% off the price for life. We know you'll love Things Canary, but if you're not happy, you can always return your canaries with their 2-month money-back guarantee for a full refund. That's canary.tools/twit, and enter the code TWIT in the How to Hear About Us box. And we thank Things Canary for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, we've been talking with Neil Cresswell. He's the CEO and co-founder of Portainer. Neil, I have a bunch of other questions, but I do want to bring my co-host back in because they also have some questions for you. Let's start with Curtis. Curtis?
Thanks, Lou. I appreciate it. Now, my question is around how these containers are being deployed. Containers started out as a dev tool, and in many organizations, they're still limited really to dev purposes. Is that what you're seeing in your users, or are you seeing more companies move them into production scenarios?
It's definitely still a dev-heavy tool. Devs get a lot of benefit out of containers. They can spin up a almost identical replica of production on their laptop. Every element of it, the MQ, the backend database, any kind of API gateways or translation layers, front-end web services, load balancers, all of that can be stood up in a self-contained fashion on a dev's laptop to let them code against what looks like production. So there's definitely some massive benefits for a developer. But equally, once a dev has it running on their laptop, they need to push their code to prod. If prod is a completely different environment, i.e. not container-based, there's still no guarantee that what's been built by the dev will work in prod. And so we're definitely seeing organizations now embracing containers across all of their landscapes, dev, test, prod. For sure. And basically through CI/CD type systems now, you can actually have an application that is committed in source code by a dev, it's merged by QA, it then is auto-built by the CI system, and then pushed to a second staging environment by a CD system for further validation, and then pushed to prod by automation. So you've got this whole automated release cycle now when people are actually embracing this stuff from prod. So it is definitely a trend towards moving the stuff into production and out of just a dev tool.
Well, as we see these move more and more towards the production side, do you think that the security issues are going to shift? Are you going to end up having to address different issues, or are the same issues that you're addressing now simply going to follow along and be sufficient as things move more towards production?
So it's different. So when you're deploying a single cluster and you want to give your users access to that cluster, it's actually okay to do it relatively manually. You can use kubectl commands, and you can go and create roles and role bindings and assign users into namespaces. You can do that. It's okay. As your use of the technology expands and you now have multiple clusters, how do you do that in a centralized, safe, and secure way? How do I say I want all of my clusters to only authenticate users against my corporate directory? How do I want to create a role for this user and have that role propagated across all of my clusters concurrently? And today you have to go and buy or find a whole bunch of open source tools to help you build and manage your environment, or you can just use one tool called Portainer. So the whole goal is to try and simplify centralized security into Portainer, and Portainer will propagate all that to all of the backends for you in a very predictable way. That's kind of the goal.
Cheebert?
Well, I'm kind of Mr. Hardware, and one of the things that I saw when I was at Black Hat and DEF CON last time was emergence of shims. Malware that's getting in between the hypervisor and the containers. And one of the things that starts coming up is how closely tied to the hypervisor are the management tools to be able to start detecting changes to the foundation that the containers are sitting on. Is that something that Portainer can help with, or should I be looking at something else? Okay, so using containers in general, there is a degree of risk if it is unconstrained. So the actual container itself can run as root, and as root, it'll look like it's root on the container host. And so there is absolutely risk. If you have your application in your container that is vulnerable, it is compromised, in theory, the hacker could actually break out of that container through to the host operating system and then do all sorts of crazy things. That is why there are certain restrictions put in place by some of the Kubernetes vendors that says your applications can only run as non-root. So if you try and run a container as a root user, then it should be rejected. So there's a whole bunch of things like that, protections that you can put in place yourself or through the back-end container construction mechanisms to ensure that your users are not able to deploy applications that aren't really safe and sound. There's always a compromise in capability and features when you do that. Not all applications can run in a non-root context in containers. But from a Portainer perspective, we simply will help the admin enforce these policies.
So if you say we can only run this in this namespace, then we'll only let users deploy in that namespace. But most of the protections that you're talking about there are probably done at the cluster layer when you're actually building the cluster.
Okay, so let's ask the question, a slightly different version of the same question, but more fair to you. Does Portainer have, say, scripts or templates to help implement best practices for the containers to help protect us from ourselves, so to speak?
Okay, so back to these policies, the administrator who is managing Portainer, they define the policies, and we basically then enforce best practices. So when a user logs into Portainer within the boundaries of what their admin has defined for them, they can only do what's been allowed. So it's not a matter of trying to encourage best practice, we enforce best practice.
One
Thank you.
question
That's
I had,
awesome.
Neil. Thanks, Hubert. The one question I had for you, obviously, we talked a little bit about this in the beginning. Kubernetes, can help you still manage your containers. It can help you. Obviously, it's challenging to sometimes configure this, but there are other, platforms out there that can help you with this, like Platform 9 or OpenShift. What are the differences here? Like, what is Portainer doing differently than some of those other ones?
Okay, so we basically say in regards to a container platform, there's two elements. There is the construction of the platform, and then there is the consumption of the platform. And the construction of the platform is basically building you a cluster, configuring all of the cluster components. That is the construction. As you say rightfully, there are products like OpenShift, there's Rancher, there's Gardener, there's a whole bunch. I think there's about 1,500 different companies who will help you build a cluster on premises if that is your so desire. Equally, you can go to any one of the major cloud providers, in fact, even more than the major now, even the minor cloud providers, and say, I want a managed Kubernetes service or container service, and they will give you a cluster that they manage on your behalf. So the actual construction of a cluster is somewhat now becoming redundant. If you are using a cloud provider, it is definitely redundant. If you're on-prem, there are definitely tools to help you do that. Kubernetes themselves even has native tools to help you with that. The other side of things is the consumption layer, and that's saying how can we make it really, really easy for users to consume the capacity that's made available by a cluster? How do you make it easy for people to deploy and manage applications on that cluster? And that's where we play. There are a few other organizations out there like Portainer who are focusing on the consumption layer. Most of those guys, though, are either SaaS services, SaaS offerings, or managed services. Portainer is different. You basically run Portainer inside your environment. It's not a SaaS offering. You install it. You can air gap it if you want. And it's focused on doing one thing and one thing well, which is being an amazing self-service portal for users and administrators to define these guardrails or boundaries.
Now, some organizations out there, they want to know, obviously they want to know where they can start, but some, that we notice there's a community edition, there's also a business edition out there. What are the differences between these editions? What are you getting when you start out with the community edition?
Almost all features, to be honest, are in our open source community edition. We are a very open source first company. And so if you just need to get containers running in a well-managed way, then the open source version is going to help you out and do that very nicely. If you need to get the use of containers past the CIO, the CISO, and tick all of the corporate compliance boxes, that's when you get into the business edition. That's when you have all things like audit logs and activity logs and all of the things that a corporate needs to have to be able to tick off this environment is safe and secure, well managed, governed, and supported. The open source version also has no official support from us. So you can use it, but you're kind of on your own with the community. So they're really the two differences. But there's about 5 feature differences in Business Edition, and that's on purpose. We really want the open source version to be as feature rich as possible. And the primary reason someone would go from the open source version to the business version is for security and compliance purposes, and also to get real SLA based support.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, all good things come to an end. Neil, thank you so much for being here. We really do appreciate it. Really great information here. We're running a little long time. I wanted to give you a chance to maybe tell the folks at home where they can find more about Portainer, maybe how they can get started.
Yeah, you can jump onto the website, portainer.io. Really, really simple website to follow through. Documentation.portainer.io. We also have a very rich and rapidly expanding YouTube channel where we are creating a lot of really immersive content which shows you how to get started with the product, take you through the journey, how to deploy Portainer on micro K8s or K3S or cloud provider solutions, how to deploy your applications, just how to get going and get the most out of it.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Well, folks, you've done it again. You've sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. So tune your podcast to TWiT. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to my co-host, starting with our very own Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, what's going on for you in the coming weeks, and where can people find you?
I'm actually playing a little bit of catch up. We were on a road trip last week, and this week I've got to go and try and catch up. House repairs, house changes. I need to go and run some data cables in my own home. Lots of fun. But you know what? One of the things that I am doing is I am trying to respond to viewer requests. We actually had a really good one about, they really liked that last episode where it was a host roundtable discussion. So one of the things I'm going to try sometime in Q2 of next year, I'm going to try and intersperse more host roundtables with guests. And that way, we can, expose some of the expertise that we have. And obviously, we've got a new host that's going to be appearing. We're not quite sure when. He was on in some of the very first TWiTs back when Padre was here. But we're working out the paperwork and logistics now. So we'll have another host. And, we're still getting some really great ideas. It's never really stopped, but we've got great ideas coming in. I'm going to try and keep a list of all these ideas. And as I find guests and PR people actually call me back or email me back, I'm going to try and schedule guests to hit those topics that you folks want. People were saying they wanted more on Kubernetes. Thank you very much, Neil. People want more on hypervisors and things like that. We're going to try and do that. When time allows and a guest can be found, we definitely need to go and get someone to talk Windows 11. So throw your ideas at me on Twitter. I'm ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. You're also welcome to drop me an email. I'm Cheebert, spelled CHEEBERT at twit.tv. But you know what? It might be better to hit TWiT at twit.tv, and that will hit all the hosts. Looking forward to hearing from you. I am keeping a list of your show ideas, and we're going to try our hardest to get PR people to let us book guests on those topics.
Thank you, Cheebert. No, I snickered a bit because do you really ever get caught up on things to do for the home?
No. Sadly, no.
Sadly, no. Thanks, Cheebert. Yeah. Well, we also have to thank our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, what's going on for you the coming weeks, and where can people find you?
Well, Lou, I mentioned that I'm going to be going to Black Hat and DEF CON, but I've got a couple of things that I think our listeners might be interested in. First, I'm going to be speaking at Black Hat, beginning with virtual sessions on August 2nd. The Omdia Analyst Summit is a new part of Black Hat this year. It is virtual, and more important, this year, it is free. Anybody can sign up for the Omdia Analyst Summit and attend a full day of Omdia Analysts, including yours truly, talking about our particular areas of focus. Head on over to the URL you see there. I'll also be posting this in my various social media accounts. Would love to see you there. Before then, though, on July 28th, I am doing a webinar, and this is on turning aware employees into cybersecurity allies. One of my areas of research for the coming year is training for employee awareness and behavior modification. And I'm doing a webinar on the 28th, sponsored by one of the leading companies in the field, KnowBe4. And I'm going to be talking about this. Once again, this one is free. So I hope people will show up. You have a chance to ask me questions, hear a bit about what I'm doing. And like I said, would love to see members of the TWiT Riot at both of these events.
Thank you, Curtis. Well, folks, we also have to thank you as well. You're the person who drops in each and every week to watch and listen to our show to get your enterprise goodness. We want to make it easy for you to watch and listen and catch up on your enterprise and IT news. Go to our show page right now, twit.tv/TWiT. There you'll find all the amazing back episodes, the show notes, the co-host information, the guest information, of course, the links of the stories we do during the show. But more importantly, next to those videos, you'll get those helpful subscribe and download links. Support the show by getting your audio version, your video version of your choice, and listen on any one of your devices or any one of your podcast applications, because we're on all of them, especially YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe right now and support the show. Plus, you may have heard of Club TWiT. That's right. It's a members-only ad-free podcast service with a bonus TWiT Plus feed that you can't get anywhere else, and it's only $7 per month. Now, one of my favorite things about Club TWiT is the exclusive access for members-only Discord channel. Some are really fun, interesting tech topics in there. We have a really great conversation in there right now. So definitely join and be part of the conversation and the content. Now, join Club TWiT and be part of it at twit.tv/clubtwit. Now, after you subscribing, to press your friends, your family members, and your coworkers with giving the gift of TWiT, because we talk about a lot of really great fun tech topics on the show, and I guarantee they'll find it fun and interesting as well. Now, when you already have subscribed, you might want to join the show live. That's right. We do the show live each and every week on Fridays, 1:30 Pacific. That's right. Come join it at live.twit.tv. Live.twit.tv. That's right. You can see all the behind the scenes, all how the pizza's made, all the fun stuff, all the banter that we do here on the show. Definitely come check out the live stream. And of course, if you're going to be part of the live stream, you might as well be part of the chat room as well. They have a really great chat room. That's right. We have an IRC chat room. It's been around for a very long time. irc.twit.tv. Join the chat room, and all the characters in there have great conversations and be part of that group. Now, hop over to twitter.com right now, and you can follow me. That's right. Twitter.com/LeoMem. There I post all my enterprise tidbits. Plus, I have great conversations with people like you. And also, sometimes I post a little bit about my daily work week at Microsoft over there as well. If you want to do a little bit more digging into what I do and maybe have some interest in what Office can do for you, you can also check out developers.microsoft.com/office. They have the latest and greatest ways you can customize your Office solution to make it more productive for you. And of course, definitely check out Office Script. It's the new greatest ways to create macros and automation for your Excel online documents. So definitely check that out. Now, I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week, and we couldn't do the show without them. So thank you for all their support. And also thank you to all the engineers and staff at TWiT. Of course, I want to thank one more time Mr. Brian Chee, because he's not only our co-host, but he's also our tireless producer. He does all the bookings and the plannings for the show, and we couldn't do this show without him. So thank you, Chee, for all your support over the years. Now, before we sign out, we do have to thank our editor for today, Mr. Victor. He's not only our editor, but he's also the guy who makes us look good behind the scenes. So, Victor, thank you for all your support. Of course, we'll have to take our technical director, our TD for today, Mr. Ant Pruitt. He's very talented guy. He does lots of stuff here at TWiT. Ant, what's going on for you over at TWiT this week?
Well, Mr. Lou, I think I broke the internet this week with hands-on photography as I was able to sit down and speak with Miss Vanessa Joy, the Canon Explorer of Light, and she walked us through a budget photo shoot using budget gear and making just unbelievable shots with the gear. It was quite the show, my man.
That's incredible. I'll definitely check that one out. Thank you, Ant, for all your support. And until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep TWiT.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. If you would like to check out more about tech news, then you should check out Tech News Weekly with me, Micah Sargent, my co-host Jason Howell, where we interview the people making and breaking the tech news every week.